Hey, it's Mrs. Wisniewski,
Hey, it's Mrs. Schulte,
and we're completing the square. So the first thing we would like for you to do is to turn your notes over to the back side. We're going to practice numbers 1, 2, and 3. We're going to just practice solving for x, and this isn't exactly completing the square, but it's just a little bit of practice. The first thing we know is if we were to solve for x, we could subtract 49 from both sides and solve it using DOPS, difference of perfect squares. But I'm going to show you a little shortcut where whenever I have an x squared, if I want to solve it, I can take the square root of it. But if I take the square root of that side, I have to take the square root of the right side. The reason I do that is because a square root cancels a squared. And if you want to know why, I'll show you in class. But the square root of x squared is x. And the square root of 49 is 7. But now that we're moving forward, it needs to be a positive 7 or negative 7. And the reason for that is because negative 7 times negative 7 is 49.
Okay guys, let's use Mrs. Wisniewski's trick that she just showed us on the last problem and see if we can solve for x in this problem. What we're going to first start by doing is taking the square root of both sides because a square root cancels a square. And what we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other side of the equation. So let's take the square root of 81. The square root of x squared is x equals, and the square root of 81 is 9. And like we just learned, going forward, we're going to add a plus or a minus.
And for this last one, it looks a little different. Now, if we were factoring, it would be in the correct order, but it's not. So, but we're not factoring, excuse me. So I'm going to add 36 to both sides to move it over, and so I can solve it using square roots. And now we're going to apply what we just learned, and I'm solving for x, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides. The square root cancels a square, we get x, and then our answer is plus or minus 6. So now we're going to flip over to the front side of our notes, and we're actually going to go through completing the square. So what we're going to do now is we are now going to force any quadratic into a perfect square so we can solve it like we just learned. It's a lot of steps, but it's the same steps every time. This method works better when the leading coefficient is 1. It can work when it's a different one, but it gets a little complicated. So we like it when the leading coefficient is 1.
Okay, so the first step, we're going to copy the quadratic equation into this box. So we'll write x squared plus 6x minus 7 equals 0. And the directions say we're going to move the constant to the other side of the equal sign. The constant is negative 7. To move it to the other side of the equal sign, we're going to add it. Add 7 to both sides. This is different because before we were making sure our equation was equal to 0. So here we go. X squared plus 6x equals 7.
Okay, so now that we have our equation in the right form, x squared plus 6x equals 7, we need to do this little piece, and usually you'll do it on the side. We need to divide b by 2. So if you look at the equation, I think you would agree that b is 6. So we need to take that and divide it by 2. It's always divided by 2. And when you divide that, you get 3. This number is important later on. And then we take that number and we square it. You should use parentheses because when you get a negative, you want to make sure it calculates correctly. And 3 squared is 9.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is take that number that we just calculated and add it to both sides of our equation. So plus 9 on the left and plus 9 on the right, which will now give us x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 7 plus 9, or we can simplify it to 16.
Okay, so now we have x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 16. So the step says to factor the left side by double bubble. The nice thing is it will always be double bubble when you're completing the square. And there's something else that ends up being very nice about it. So we have an x and an x, and if you look at our signs, we have a plus and a plus. What multiplies to 9 but adds to 6, it's a 3. As you practice this more and more, you'll realize that this and this are exactly the same. They should always be the same. If they're not, you're doing something wrong. That's why it's called completing the square, because we are now forcing this into a perfect square. So because these are exactly the same, I can rewrite this as a square because there's two of them that are exactly the same. And that's really what completing the square is all about. We're forcing it into that.
But wait, there's more. We're not done. So right now we are at x plus 3 squared equals 16. And now what we're going to do is take the square root of both sides. The square root cancels the square, which leaves us with x plus 3. And what we do to one side, we do to the other. The square root of 16 is 4. And remember, we're going to write it as plus or minus 4.
Okay, so the last step is to solve for x. So we're here. We have it simplified. The problem is, to solve for x, how do we do that when we have plus or minus 4? Do you guys remember what we did when we were using the quadratic formula? We split it. That's right. I know you knew the answer. So we're splitting it, and we have x plus 3 equals the positive 4, and x plus 3 equals the negative 4. So I'm going to solve each of these. So I'm going to subtract 3 and do the opposite. So x equals 1. And over here I'm going to subtract 3. And I get negative 7. So that is now my solution. Ooh, that's not bad. Don't be jealous. Oh, nice.
Okay, so remember, complete your notes and hand them in tomorrow for the bonus 2 points.
And for watching this video, you get an extra 5 quiz points if you can take out your yellow graphic organizer and do the completing the square section. So if you do that correctly, you can and hand in your notes from today, it's a total of 7 points.